Hello, and welcome to our discussion of social responsibility or social responsibility in marketing or marketing and social responsibility, however we want to term this particular topic. We're going to do several things in this particular video. We're going to define and operationalize or at least what I mean about socially responsible marketing. We're going to focus on three topics. We're going to talk about ethics, we're going to talk about criticisms of marketing, and we're going to talk about the so-called triple bottom line approach. Notice that I have a long sleeve shirt on. I'm recording this in late June of 2017, and when I was walking down the driveway this morning, I was able to see my breath. I'm like, what is wrong with this picture? But be that as it may, we will forge ahead with our discussion of socially responsible marketing. So I have my handy little cheat sheet here, and I'm going to refer to it. Excuse me. I don't know what's going on with me. So a definition, and again, the reason I say a definition, there's a lot of different definitions and ways that socially responsible marketing can be operationalized. The way I like to talk about it is what is marketing's responsibility for the short-term and long-term well-being of society? And so again, what is marketing's responsibility for the short-term and the long-term well-being of society? And this definition, I mean, it seems, it's kind of like it's cut and dried, but it's not really that cut and dried. So, for example, how do you define the short term? How do you define the long term? Right? Is the short term less than a year? Is it 6 months? Is it 5 years? Is the long term 2 years? Is it 8 years? Is it 15 years? And this becomes important from a variety of perspectives. And just to give you an example, there's an artificial sweetener out there. Brand name goes by the name of NutraSweet. Right, it's actually aspartame or aspartame, however you pronounce it, and this is an artificial sweetener that's no calorie, and it's been approved for use by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, but when they approved it for use, they really didn't have long-term, like 5, 10, 15 year studies looking at the potential effects of this particular product. And so the importance of the definition between short-term and long-term is that, if you basically say we need to focus on what's in both the short-term and the long-term benefit of society or well-being of society, if the long term is 25 years and you're thinking of bringing a product to market, if you're a regulatory body, do you need 25 years worth of evidence that the product is going to not be harmful to society? And so if you're an organization, you come up with this new product idea, and basically it's like, well, no, we're not going to do anything with it because we're not really sure, how it might be used. I mean, if you think, for example, if you think about cell phones, right? I mean, when I got my degree, when I took marketing was one of my minors when I got my PhD, and I had to take a comprehensive exam in marketing, and one of the questions was develop a demand model for cellular mobile phones. And if you'd have told me back in 1984 when I took this exam, if you'd have told me now that these things would not be cell phones, they would be smartphones, and if you were to think about all the ways that cell phones could be both used for a good purpose as well as a not good purpose, right? Would we have even brought the things out? I mean, who would have imagined people texting while they're driving, talking while they're driving, and doing all sorts of things like that? So, well-being, the short-term and the long-term well-being of society. The second question that arises from that definition or operationalizing of socially responsible marketing is who gets to play God? Who gets to play God with respect to determining what the well-being of society is? right? So, for example, some states, given that we're coming up on the 4th of July, some states are very restrictive in the selling and the use of fireworks, in part because some people haven't necessarily used fireworks responsibly. And so you got the question, well, is that the responsibility of the companies that manufacture the fireworks, or is it the responsibility of the people who are using the fireworks? And if people make the decision to use fireworks irresponsibly, should the rest of the world suffer because either you can't sell, or state of Ohio is an interesting state, for example. You can buy fireworks in the state of Ohio, but you're not supposed to use them. Now, how many people really do that? So you get into this, kind of, interesting kind of thing of who gets to basically make the decisions about what's in the well-being of society. All right. So we've talked a little bit about how socially responsible marketing might be defined and operationalized. Again, we're going to focus on three topics. The first one is ethics, and when we talk about ethics, we're talking about codes of conduct, right? How does a business view its behavior, and what guidelines does it use? We're not talking about legal stuff. We're talking about things that may not be illegal, but a business might have a conscience, say, no, we're not going to do that. So, just to give you an example, Chick-fil-A is a well-known fast food restaurant, and through the years, a lot of people have said to Chick-fil-A, you really need to open on Sunday because you're losing a lot of business because you don't open on Sunday. But Chick-fil-A chooses not to open on Sunday because the founder of the organization was a very religious person, and he believes Sunday is the Sabbath and a day of rest and stuff like that. So it's not legal or illegal. It's just that Chick-fil-A has a very strong moral compass when it comes to operations. And there becomes this fine line between, well, if it's not illegal, then it's okay. In some organizations, that's the way they view things. In other organizations, not so much. And where ethics, there's a number of areas in marketing where ethics can touch. One of the areas is in marketing research, and Facebook has faced some issues in recent years because it has allowed university professors like myself, but I haven't been involved with Facebook research, but it has allowed university professors to access data that Facebook has. The problem with the data that Facebook has is that it was collected without the explicit consent of people, because Facebook was, running experiments based on information that it was putting on the Facebook site. And one group of Facebook users was maybe seeing a certain type of information, and another set was not seeing that same information. And Facebook's argument is, well, when you sign the terms of agreement, when you agree to use Facebook, you say, yeah, I've read all this stuff, and I acknowledge that you're going to be using, my data or my profile. And in reality, who reads those disclosures real carefully? So and there's a number of other examples, and one of the challenges sometimes with ethics in marketing or ethics in business is that if it's not illegal, some companies will pursue it, and what ends up happening is that sometimes the federal government steps in and basically makes a law or a regulation that ends up being much more harmful, because regulations and laws are costly. They have to be enforced, they have to be written, and things of that nature. So we've talked a little bit about ethics. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about the criticisms of marketing. And there's a lot of different criticisms of marketing, and I think marketing is a wonderful thing. Obviously, I teach at a business school, and so I'm pretty much of a capitalist when it comes to things. But I recognize that I firmly believe that organizations should have some type of social responsibility. And with respect to the marketing discipline, like I said, there's a number of criticisms. One of the criticisms is that marketing gets people to spend money on stuff that they can't afford, right? And marketers can do this in a number of different ways. So one way is, for example, many of you may have revolving credit, like a MasterCard or a Visa card. And when I was your age, it was very unusual for college students to be extended credit. And you say, well, how does that, how does that make people buy things that they don't want? Well, it doesn't necessarily make people buy things that they don't want, but it makes it easier for people to buy things that they might not necessarily be able to afford, right? So, if you're looking at the price tag of something and you've got a credit line, let's say you got a credit line of $1,500, right? And you look at something that's $500, you go, hey, I got a credit card, I got $1,500, line of credit, I can buy that $500 thing. Back when I was your age, it's like you look at it and you go, $500, I don't have $500, I can't afford that. You don't buy it, right? So, access to credit, particularly at a younger age, or particularly with people who are, maybe, not don't manage their money real well, and what ends up happening with some people is they get into debt, and they're taking out credit cards and using drawing cash against the credit, one credit card to pay off the bill with another credit card, and so there's an argument that marketing sometimes get people to spend money on stuff they can't afford. A second criticism of marketing is that marketing sometimes produces goods and sells goods without considering environmental costs, right? And to be fair, the next major topic we're going to talk about, triple bottom line, addresses that. But for example, bottled water is a huge thing right now. It's probably second nature to many of you. But I'll go back to when I was your age. If you'd ever told me that people would walk around drinking water out of a bottle, a plastic bottle, I would have looked at you like you were half crazy, because you just didn't do it. You found a water fountain, you found a tap, you took the water out of the spigot, you put it in a cup, put it in a glass, you drank it. You weren't walking around with a water bottle. Part of what's happened is that you see people with water bottles, and there's a certain image, right, associated. Ooh, they're drinking bottled water. They're cool. They're sophisticated. They're not drinking tap water. In many cases, bottled water isn't a whole lot better than tap water, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. But where the plastic stuff comes in is that plastic is horrible from an environmental perspective. It takes hundreds of years to biodegrade. And so that's why you see, if you've been around John Carroll and you see some of the newer water fountains that have been put in, they have the things that allow you to fill up either metal containers, or you can even fill up plastic bottles, but with water from the water fountains, because there's a concern, particularly with respect to plastic. So, and like I said, in some instances, marketers they're just bringing out products that and they're not necessarily thinking about the environmental cost and consequences, right? So. First criticism we talked about was getting people to spend on stuff they can't afford. A second criticism is it produces and sells goods without considering environmental cost. And a third criticism of marketing, again, there are many more than three, is that marketers will give customers what they want, whether or not it's good for them. And there's a number of examples of that, but one particularly compelling example from a socially responsible marketing perspective is portion sizes. And the U.S., for example, and the obesity statistics. I used to do some management development stuff for the Catholic Cemeteries Conference. It's a group of Catholic cemeteries, primarily in the United States. And I would do like a 2-day thing that was basically a principles of marketing course condensed into 2 days. And one of the things we would talk about is obesity statistics and the implications that obesity statistics has on funerals and cemeteries and things like that. And if you go back basically to the 1980s, what you'll find is that virtually no states in the United States had an obesity rate of greater than 25%. And if you look at them now, there's very few states in the United States that have obesity rates of less than 25%. And a lot of the obesity, or it's one of the criticisms of marketing, is that a lot of the obesity is caused by, fast foods, sugary drinks, big portion sizes, and things like that. And part of the argument from organizations is, well, people want bigger portions, right? We want supersized fries, we want supersized drinks, we want supersized burgers, right? And so there's an interesting kind of tug of war going on there. If you've ever traveled outside the United States, right? If you've been to Europe, for example, I go to Croatia. I teach in Croatia every year after the end of the spring semester at John Carroll. And, when I walk into the McDonald's in downtown Zagreb, I'm getting a soda. It's a large soda in Croatia. It's a medium in the United States. It's the exact same. Container, but it's considered a large in Croatia and a medium in the United States. So, third criticism is that marketers will give customers what they want, whether or not it's good for them. All right. So, the last thing we're going to talk about, and ties into what we were talking about to some extent with criticisms of marketing, is the so-called triple bottom line approach to organizations, or for organizations. And there's a couple of ways that this can be categorized. There's a so-called 3P approach, which is people, planet, profit, right? Or also social, environmental, and financial. And so what the key thing about the triple bottom line approach, again, people, planet, profit, or social, environmental, and financial, is that organizations should look at their decisions from three perspectives, right? Either people, planet, profit, or social, environmental, and financial, right? And then you kind of weigh the pluses and the minuses of those three perspectives to come up with a decision. So, for example, at John Carroll only serves and sells what is known as fair trade coffee, right? And without going into what fair trade coffee is all about, it basically, fair trade coffee is coffee that is produced and grown and produced and harvested according to people, planet, profit considerations. And so John Carroll has chosen to basically only sell and serve fair trade coffee. Another issue with the kind of the triple bottom line approach is where are products manufactured. So, for example, a lot of clothing is manufactured in Asia, the Pacific Rim, and part of the reason for that is that the labor regulations are very different. The environmental regulations are very different. Hence, the total costs are very different. But part of the challenge is that there have been, in recent years, there have been a number of high profile things where factories have had fires and people have had no way to escape. There was a building collapse in Bangladesh a few years ago. And a whole bunch of people were killed, and it turns out that basically when the building was constructed, the builder cut corners big time. And what's at the root of a lot of this is that companies are choosing to manufacture products in Pacific Rim countries because the labor's cheaper, the environmental regulations aren't as stringent. The labor regulations aren't as stringent, and so you're able to reduce costs. And if you're able to reduce costs, that allows you to sell a product at a lower price, and more people will be interested in buying or could be interested in buying your product. So bottom line is there's a lot of different considerations that organizations and marketers need to keep in mind if they want to, take a socially responsible approach to things. So clock on the wall tells me that I'm about 19 and a half minutes, so I will stop there and we will see you down the road. Bye.